So today we are going to speak about probably one of the most pervasive and destructive struggles of our time, which is pornography. Um, I have done my very best to prayerfully present this to you in a way that hopefully will help you see it for what it really is and will lead you to flee from it and to help others who are struggling with it to leave it behind as well. The primary text that I use for this is called From Object to Icon, The Struggle for Spiritual Vision in a Pornographic World. This is by Andrew Williams, and he's a graduate from Holy Cross, and now works as a healthcare counselor and a therapist. So the structure for the class is we are going to watch a 6-minute video at the start, then I will do some speaking, and then after that we'll watch another video that's about 10 minutes. I've truncated it, and then I'll leave you guys with the final few comments. So may God help us.
Addiction to pornography is prevalent for a really simple reason. It's more available than it ever has been. It's easier to access, and part of this is not a spiritual struggle. Part of this is just a physical struggle. Why? Because men go through puberty. When you go through puberty, there are hormones and chemicals going through your body that drive you towards lust. But men who haven't learned to contain and control that lust and aren't living for a higher purpose end up embracing it. And what's happened is that in embracing it, many men feel deep shame. And so the world has said the cure to this is to get away from the shame, not to get away from the thing that's causing the shame in the first place. It's a completely wrong message. What happens to men when they're addicted to pornography? Well, first of all, to call it a victimless crime is just foolish. We know that because of the sex trade today, of sex slavery. We know that it's not victimless at all. We also know that even if that weren't the case, if everyone participating in this horrific industry were doing so completely of their own wills, they weren't coming from broken backgrounds and broken families, it's destroying their souls. And that industry wouldn't exist if men weren't feeding into it in the first place. If there was nobody to watch pornographic videos, new pornographic videos would never be made in the first place. So to call it a victimless crime is really disingenuous. It's not true. It's harming your soul. It's harming the souls of those who are participating in creating these materials, and it's harming the souls of those who are other people who are watching it. Because we as a society have decided to do away with this idea that there's anything wrong with it. If you're watching it, if you're viewing it, if you're participating in this, you're part of that issue. So that's where I'd start with that. Now, why is it such a problem? Because when men succumb to their passions and let their passions lead them, they become weaker and they don't feel like real men. And then men look for other outlets. They either look for more comfort, which means more pornography, or they go to this false masculinity that we talked about, where they try to become more aggressive, more alpha male in ways that are really not very healthy. And so we become less of a man when we do this. You know, man properly ordered has God who's calling us to a certain life. It has the soul, which is seeking to follow God as much as possible, in the most pure way possible, and then it has the body, which is there to serve the soul. What we've done is we've completely flipped this on its head, and we say the desires of the body come first. The soul is there to serve the body, and God is there if he's even there at all, and we just ignore him. This is extremely dangerous for man. You can't build a society that way. You certainly can't have a functioning, healthy family in that way. And I'm convinced as men, we don't really feel like men in that way. We feel disordered. And if you've convinced yourself that you don't feel disordered, if you really took a look at yourself, if you really examine it, you're going to realize there is something there that's wrong, and you're going to want out of that. So pornography, I think, is hugely destructive. It's hugely destructive, but because it's so darn available, there's never been a situation in the history of mankind where you can pull a phone out of your pocket and then look up any depraved thing you could think of. It's so available. So we need to start working on it, and we need to start taking it much more seriously. And I think as a society, we need to reattach the stigma to pornography and the pornographic industry that was once there. So this past month, I finished the initial draft of a book that so far I'm entitling Conquering Lust and Shame. I'm not sure about the title because, as the book explains, we don't really want to conquer shame, we want to sanctify shame. Shame was given to us by God, it's a gift, but shame has been so twisted by the devil. And so I finished the initial draft. I'm going to have 4 or 5 priests take a look at it and give me their suggestions. I don't know how long it'll take for them to get me their suggestions, then find a publisher, but I'm hoping that sometime this year this book will be published. The book really goes through various strategies for how to conquer lust mainly for men. Women can read it, but it's really aimed mainly at men. And there are three themes that I have go throughout this book that are constantly brought back in everything that I suggest, all the strategies that I suggest. The first is what we just talked about, and that's that the devil really doesn't care so much about making men fall into lust. And that may be kind of a surprising statement to a lot of people, but if you fall into lust, there's always repentance. Christ gave us the gift of repentance, and so we can live out our repentance more fully. The demon knows that. So the demons, what they really want is not to make men fall into lust, but to fall into despair. And that's the shame that we want to conquer. They want to make us fall into despair so that we stop seeking Christ altogether. We really want to avoid that. Number two, we need to understand that Christ could take lust away from a man like that. But the reason he doesn't is the same as with all the passions, is because the struggle is our salvation. And actually learning to properly battle against lust, men will learn the spiritual life. They'll learn how to pray in a way that they never would have otherwise. They'll learn how to fast. They'll learn how to do prostrations, how to read the scriptures. They're going to learn to become better, more fulfilled men because of this struggle. And so this struggle will become a teacher. There's a quote that I want to add to the book. I haven't put it in there because I haven't found the proper source yet, but it comes from St. Ambrose of Optina. And St. Ambrose of Optina was asked, how did you learn to be such a master of the Jesus prayer? Who taught you? Was it the elder before you, Saint Leonid of Optina? He goes, no, it wasn't him. Was it this elder Hilarion? No, it wasn't him either. Well, then who taught you? And he said, no, I had the best teacher in the world, the devil. The devil taught me to pray because every time he attacked, I went and prayed more, and that's where I learned how to pray. So if we really understand this battle properly, it will teach us the spiritual life. And number three, and this is so important, we will never succeed in this fight against lust if men fight against lust and against the demon of lust. In doing so, all you do is get into a conversation with him, and guess what? He is much smarter, much more experienced than you in the fight. He's going to make you fall. What you have to do is want something more than you want lust. You have to fight for a purity that you want more. You have to fight for Christ. You have to fight for the spiritual life. You have to fight for all these things, for your family. You have to find the things that you're fighting for more than you're fighting against lust. And if those become a greater motivator for you, if you learn these spiritual tactics that I recommend in the book, and you're fighting for those things and learning them, and you refuse the devil despair, then you'll have victory in this eventually. And I've seen men conquer this. It takes time, but that time really does teach them the spiritual life, and they become better Christians and better men because of it.
All right. So for us to begin talking about pornography, I want to define it quickly. Pornography stems from two Greek words, porneia and graphi. Porneia relates to sexual immorality and unfaithfulness, and graphi is something drawn, written, or painted. So together, it is media related to sexual immorality and unfaithfulness. And I think if we take a step back and just let that sink in, you realize that this is incredibly broad, right? From the simple advertising we see to the music that we listen to, the music videos, the TV shows, the movies, it literally has infected every sort of media. And as the author in the book said, our modern globalized society has increasingly pornified its media and advertising. The saying, the catchphrase "sex sells" has been in place since the 50s. And this applies as much to social media, art, and cinema as much as it does to advertising. None of us who live and work in such a society every day can remain untouched. But for the sake of today, we are going to narrow the definition to the sexually explicit content commonly known as porn. So how pervasive is this? In 2005, 25% of men and 4% of women viewed pornography monthly. As of 2020, 60 to 70% of men and 20 to 25% of women view monthly. And additionally, while women are less likely than men to engage in the visual content, they are drawn more towards pornographic literature and fantasy. And we know about those grotesque books like 50 Shades of Grey and the rest. In fact, when pornographic literature is included in these metrics, in a 2020 study reported that 91.5% of men and 60.2% of women consume pornography on a monthly basis. So why now? Just as Father Trubenbach had mentioned, so much is about the increased availability that stems from new technologies, and particularly the internet. To put the magnitude of this problem into perspective, in 2018, one of the biggest pornographic websites had 130,000 visitors on a daily basis, and they consumed 5.8 million hours of content annually. Oh, actually, excuse me, hold on. I misspoke. I meant 130 million viewers daily on this single website, and 5.8 billion hours of content consumed on an annual basis. One website. And mind you, we don't need to be prophets to see what's on the horizon with AI. I think over the last few weeks, we've seen tons of videos coming out of these incredibly realistic, something's funny and things like that, where you can't even tell the difference between an authentic production versus something that's AI generated. So undoubtedly, the porn industry is using this and will use this to build some of the most addictive content possible and make the struggle even greater for humanity. May God have mercy on us. This is also prevalent among teens and even earlier as well. 71% of teens have encountered pornography, with more than half being exposed before the age of 13. About 60% of first exposures are unintentional, while 40% are deliberate. And I'm not sharing any of this to upset or disturb anyone, but for us to properly engage this struggle, it is important to understand the gravity of what we're dealing with. So what's the draw? Well, for one, it simulates an intimate relationship without the inconvenience of actually engaging in the salvific path of relating to someone, humbling yourself before them, sacrificing for them, and putting one's needs and desires above your own. It's an attempt to have your cake and eat it too, which is, of course, an impossibility. It can also be seen as a way to gratify sexual desire without technically cheating, because there's no physical contact with the other. However, faithfulness is not some technicality. There is no loophole. Unfaithfulness is the act of turning away from your spouse, regardless of whom we turn towards when we seek a sexual connection. And we hear this definitively stated by our Savior. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It could not be more clear. And then we also have this false perception of anonymity, right? It's like no one knows, this is all hidden. But Christ says, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known. Nothing will be hidden, my brothers and sisters, nothing. Now, to understand the spiritual consequences of pornography, we have to understand who God is, who we are, how we relate with the created world, and how God relates with us through it. All of God's creation, everything, was intended to draw us towards God. We often encounter this truth in the Psalms, like when King David exclaims, "The heavens declare the glory of God." St. Paul also tells the Romans that God is perceived in creation. For those who have the eyes to see, everything reveals God himself. This revelatory power of creation is also shared by iconography. Icons also reveal God to us. Our interaction with icons invites us into a relationship with God and with the saints portrayed. In other words, the power of the icon lies in its ability to connect us and heaven. When we say something is iconographic, we are talking about the relationship we can have with God through his creation and our participation in it. In Genesis, we read, "Let us make man in our image and according to our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Man is the foremost icon of God. It is only us who were fashioned in his image and likeness. As icons of God, we should reveal God to others and have the spiritual eyes capable of perceiving God in the other person. Pornography is the antithesis of this. It takes an icon of God designed to reveal him and distorts it into an object fit only to gratify our transient desires and pleasures. Now, desire in and of itself is not wrong. In fact, God imbued us with this gift to be directed towards him. This is often accomplished through a spouse in marriage. The love and devotion we offer towards our spouse is ultimately offered unto God. When Eve was fashioned from Adam's side in Genesis 2, and Adam awoke, he was captivated by Eve and exclaimed, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Do you see the enamor and the infatuation from the very beginning? This bond between man and woman is one of the foundational attributes of the human person. The deepest part of each of us desires to reach out and make a real connection. So though it may sound strange, the impulse to embrace the icon and the temptation to embrace pornography share the same root, the desire to connect. But all that is evil wants to twist this desire so that it no longer points to ultimate fulfillment in the union with God through his creation. Rather, it becomes a desire that ultimately leads nowhere, seeing creation as an end in and of itself. And ultimately, our desires and fantasies begin to shape us by building these aspects of our behavior into our character and person, drawing me either towards heaven or towards hell. Recent neurologic studies have demonstrated that imagining something has a very similar effect on the brain as to actually experiencing it. In this, we can see that science itself testifies to Christ's words, that we commit adultery when we lust for a woman in our heart. The truth of this has even a physiologic basis. Now, the spiritual consequences of pornography are vast. For one, it distorts my vision of humanity and creation, leading me to objectify others rather than to venerate them. The more I expose myself to pornography, the more I see the rest of the world as being pornographic. This is the opposite of the process of purification, where the eye of my heart learns to see what is beyond the flesh and not just the flesh itself. In this increasingly pornified view, I see the flesh everywhere, and I increasingly objectify people I encounter, interpreting their words, their tone of voice, their glances and movements in my own distorted reality. This is a process of increasing spiritual blindness. St. John of Damascus teaches that the reverence and honor that we offer to the image or to the icon passes on to God himself. Conversely, the disrespect to the image that we offer is also disrespect offered to God. We are all icons of God, and this same principle applies to how we respect or disrespect others. Through pornography, we also become habituated to passion. St. John of Kronstadt, who we commemorate today, says, "The more a man leads a carnal mode of life, the more carnal he becomes. He sees flesh and matter in everything, and nowhere nor at any time is God before his eyes. The more a weed is watered, the deeper the roots grow, and the more difficult it is to eradicate." And Christ also makes this clear, stating, "Most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin." This is passion. And we must also understand that our sins do not occur in some isolated vacuum. Every sin, seen or unseen, is of cosmic significance, as St. Sophrony likes to say. He says, "The essence of sin consists not in the infringement of ethical standards, but in a falling away from the eternal divine life for which man was created, and to which, by his very nature, he is called. The sin of our forefather Adam was not the only sin of cosmic significance. Every sin, manifest or secret, committed by each one of us affects the rest of the universe." And we might say, the rest of the universe, like really? It's not just my own little bubble, but he contests, sin is committed first of all in the secret depths of the human spirit, but its consequences involve the individual as a whole, meaning it begins within the heart and starts to involve us as a whole. A sin will reflect on a man's psychological and physical condition, on his outward appearance, and on his personal destiny. So our personal sins affect the trajectory of our lives. And sin will inevitably pass beyond the boundaries of the sinner's individual life to burden all humanity, thus affect the fate of the whole world. So the trajectory of our lives and the way that we conduct ourselves eventually affects all of those around us. Now, Father Paul touched on the concept of shame in pornography use. And one of the primary issues with this negative shame, this shame that leads to despair, is that we begin to confuse our sin with our very nature, with who we are. So pornography is accompanied by shame, and there is this deep-seated shame in use. And this leads to a sense of an inability to be able to conquer it. And this leads to despair, and which ultimately leads to more pornography use, which is a cycle of this cycle of like shame and despair that goes back and forth. And pornography is also particularly detrimental in marriage. Pornography use nearly doubles the probability of having a divorce. 56% of divorces involve one party having, quote, an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. Many studies have shown that this leads to lower satisfaction in relationships, reduced frequency of marital sex, erosion of intimacy and emotional connection, sexual dysfunction like porn-induced erectile dysfunction due to a distorted understanding of marital intimacy, issues with trust and betrayal, and unrealistic expectations. And towards the beginning, I briefly mentioned that faithfulness to our spouse is not a technicality. When we understand pornography use as fulfilling Christ's words on lusting after another, we can clearly see that pornography use is spiritual adultery. Elder Ephraim of Arizona comments on this concept of spiritual adultery, saying, "My child, be attentive to fantasies and sinful thoughts. Everything begins with a thought. Set a guard over your mind so that immoral images do not enter the imaginative part of your intellect. Otherwise, there immediately arises the danger that the soul will sin and grieve him who, for all of our sakes, was crucified on the shameful but then now honorable cross. Spiritual adultery is committed very easily if we allow shameful thoughts and similar fantasies to rule within us. This is nothing other than spiritual adultery. My child, if you wish to overcome the demon of lust, be watchful with your eyes. It is also by no means safe to look at inappropriate images, newspapers, magazines, and other such things." So how do we combat this? And I want to leave it to Father Jason in the next video to discuss that with us.
The most effective way that a person can do, whether they're a man or a woman, is to, first of all, we're going back to establish that kind of a relationship of accountability with their spiritual father. If they need to also maybe have accountability, careful with this, but have accountability with someone they trust or a group that they trust. The trust part and confidentiality has to be of essence there, right? And to be discreet and practice some, if they're adults, they should speak to other adults. Don't talk to any minors about these things. Even if the minor confides in you that they have this struggle too, that's not appropriate. Help them any way you can. If you're struggling with this yourself, you should probably just direct them to somebody else. But an adult should reach out to their spiritual father and maybe another adult. Some parishes at times have groups that they use to help people, like support groups. There was a time where we had a group like that here in our parish, and I believe it might even still be going on, where it's a group that's confidential. No one knows about it. No one talks about it. It's like Fight Club. All right, no one knows about it. No one talks about it, but it exists, and it's there for people that need it. It has the blessing of a priest, like all ministries do. And it's a group that meets to have accountability and share struggles. So that's one thing. The next thing the person can do is to practice the opposite virtue, which is purity. Strive to fight and to not give into these things. It's a lot easier said than done. But something that really helps in that struggle is to fast, because the Holy Fathers tell us, especially in that other great spiritual treatise and manual, the Ladder of Divine Ascent, St. John Climacus tells us that the passion of fornication, aka the passion of lust, and the passion of gluttony are closely linked together. And usually men, and now women more so, will find that when they overindulge and they enter into gluttony, they live like a glut, then it facilitates the temptation to give into this other passion. So one thing that seems to help tremendously is to practice fasting. I believe the way it's described by St. John in the Ladder of Divine Ascent is that the man who is trying to put out the passion of fornication but doesn't fast is like the man who is pouring oil or fuel on a fire and expects it to go out. So if you're just living a life of pleasure and luxury and drinking whatever you want and eating whatever you want and expect that through some other means you're going to stop this struggle with lust, that might not happen. It might not happen. You have to humble your body and subdue it. Remind it who's in charge, that you want the spirit to be in charge. The soul is in charge, not it. You have to remind it, I'm in charge. This is why we Orthodox, we try to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays especially. We say no to legitimate pleasures that are not sinful. So there's nothing wrong with cheese. There's nothing wrong with meat. But we practice saying no so that when the illicit pleasures come, we know how to say no. We can say no to those as well. We have an ability to say no. Just like when a child is learning how to say no. I remember, sorry for this digression, but I remember as a young parent when I had my firstborn. I have 5 children. My firstborn many years ago when she was around 2.5, 3, I remember she entered into that phase where she learned she had a will and she could say no, do this, no. And I had a friend come over, a parishioner from here come over, and he was picking up something from my home, a piece of furniture that he was getting. And I remember I asked my daughter, don't do this, you have to do that, go do that. And she's just flat out in front of the person said, no, this little 3-year-old. And I was so embarrassed. And I looked at the man and I said, can you believe that? And I'll never forget, the man said, no, that's good, Father. That's really good. I said, what do you mean that's good? And he said, she's entering into the phase where she's learning that she can have a sense of autonomy and that she can say no, that no is an option. And it's important for her to say no. He said, if she does it too much, Father, down the road, then you'll have to correct her. But he said, it's important for her to understand that no is an option so that in the future, when she's 15, when she's 20, if someone's forcing her or doing something to her, or she needs to stand up for herself, she knows that I can say no. I don't have to be afraid. I can say no. In a similar way, if we can apply that to the fasting. So a man or a woman who's struggling with lust, if you fast, you're learning that you can say no. You can say no to your body, even if your body's hungry. If you fast from those treats or that sugar or that extra plate, you're teaching yourself that I can say no. So when the urge comes, you can have that willpower, so to speak, with the grace of God to say no. And then you acknowledge it. You simply acknowledge it. Yes, I think that person's attractive, but I don't need to look at them anymore. The answer is no. This is an internal dialogue, and you remind yourself, by saying no to that, I say yes to Christ. I say yes to Christ. One practical other thing for someone struggling with this particular passion is something that I heard once from a psychologist. Here at the parish, we have various psychologists and psychiatrists that come here. And one psychologist shared once that something they recommend to people is something called urge surfing. Urge surfing. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. But the reality is, and this is something that I always encourage people to remember, the urge is going to come back. The urge is going to come back. And eventually, God willing, with time it dissipates and it loses its strength, but it's going to come back. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So just like when you're at the beach and you're playing in the water, you've been to the beach, presumably, right? You're in the Midwest, right? So maybe
we come out here when
we
go to the beach. Yeah.
So you've been to the beach where there's waves, so if you're at the beach and there's waves, you know that they're coming, and you're maybe out there in the water and you're talking to your friend and you know it's coming. You can hear it, you see it, you're aware of it, and then you come up, with your friend, the plan. Hey, are we going under? What are we going to do? We're going to go on top? What are we going to do? Are we going to plunge underneath it? What? And when it comes, you have a plan and you write it out, and then it goes and it fades, and then you're playing again, you're talking, you're out there swimming, and it's going to come back and subside, and you know that it's not over. Eventually, another one is going to come. But if you don't pay any attention and you're completely distracted, by the time you look, it's going to hit you, it's going to pummel you on the floor. It could hurt you if it's shallow. It could really mess you up. Get seriously hurt. You could get scratches on your face in the sand. So it's a matter of being aware. Oh, here's another wave. I'm tempted. So you make a plan. Okay, what's the plan? What's the response? Okay, I'm not going to use this. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to go pray. I'm going to go stand before my icons, and I'm not going to move till this thing fades. And it does fade. The wave comes, it crashes, it goes out, and then it recedes and it goes. People usually find, just like they do with other addictions, smoking, things like that, if they wait it out for about 15 minutes, the power of it fades. And a lot of it is just accepting that you have the temptation. Yes, I'm being tempted to look at things I shouldn't look at. Okay. I can't do that. That's not an option for me. And you just wait it out, and then you'll feel like, oh wow, it faded. That doesn't mean it's over. Never fool yourself. And that's one of the things that the unseen warfare really emphasizes. Never fool yourself and convince yourself that you've completely gone victorious over your enemy. Sometimes, especially in another spiritual work, the Philokalia, sometimes the demons, these temptations will leave us on purpose. They will leave us for a while to make us convinced. If you've gone victory for a month, I haven't looked at anything illicitly. I don't look at people. I'm done. I'm healed. I'm over it. Sometimes the demons could be leaving us and wait till we're in a moment of weakness, and then they ambush us, the Holy Fathers tell us. So these are some practical things to think about.
All right. So in landing this plane, all right, I want to close with just a few words of encouragement and some practical advice, supported by what we've just watched, because the breadth and depth of this temptation can seem overwhelming and even insurmountable. And even St. Anthony the Great felt this way when God showed him the traps that the evil one had laid for humanity. St. Anthony said, "I saw the snares that the enemy spreads out over the world, and I said, groaning, what can get through such snares? Then I heard a voice saying to me, humility." As Father said in his sermon, and once again it's right on target with this, apart from Christ, we can do nothing. Our passions can never be eradicated through our own isolated efforts. Anyone who has pridefully struggled against them knows the futility of this through experience. When we finally realize our utter weakness against our passions, we can truly cry out to God with a broken and humble heart. This is the beginning of our journey towards liberation. But this brokenness of heart and the grace God offers must be accompanied by labor, by effort, which reveals to God that this freedom, this life in Him, is truly what we desire. Practically speaking, we must be watchful and vigilant. Our hearts and minds should be prayerfully directed towards God at all times. We are told in Proverbs to let our eyes be directed straight forward and to neither look right nor left. When insidious thoughts come to draw our attention, and they absolutely will come, as Father Jason said, we should not accept them as our own. We simply and calmly return our spiritual eyes to our Lord with boldness as His sons and daughters, with confidence that He who instructed us to forgive 70 times 7 will always forgive and receive us, and with humility knowing that it is only through God's grace, mercy, and love that we can find healing and lasting peace. It's also essential for us to go to confession, speak with Father Constantine and your spiritual father, sincerely and openly confess your struggle, receive and experience those sweetest words of forgiveness, be strengthened by His counsel, and be fortified by accountability to Him. Embrace asceticism like a dear friend. Fast, pray, make prostrations, give alms, and use the tools the Church has offered to us for our salvation. Also practice technological asceticism. Discuss with your family how to structure your home life and technology usage so that you command it rather than it commanding you. Dive into the liturgical and sacramental life of the Church, all of which has been given to us to refashion us into that ancient beauty of His likeness. And also be resilient and don't despair. The struggle with the passions is often long and arduous. When it feels like our prayers are not being answered, we should thank God for allowing us to struggle. For as the saints say, God allows us to struggle so that He may reward us with a crown. And we have heard from Christ Himself that he who endures to the end will be saved. So I'll finish with these words from Elder Emilianos of Simanopetra. Man often flees from himself because he is afraid of what he will find in his own depths. But if we dare to look deeper, we will find there God Himself, patiently waiting for us to hand over to Him our wounds and our pain. Do not fear the inner struggle. Your wounds and traumas may seem like insurmountable obstacles, but every struggle is an opportunity for the grace of God to act within you. Each time you face your fear, God is there with you. Christ has already conquered death, sin, and the devil. Pornography has a hold on our lives only as much as we give it. Lean into the struggle, turn unto God, and allow Him to be victorious in you, for He has already overcome the world.